everyone, Aaron Lovejoy here for Miniature Monthly, and you guessed it, it is Wednesday, it is travel day, and I am getting all the cool miniatures that I've been painting over the last year packed up and ready to go to GenCon. We've got all kinds of cool stuff, a bunch of Forbidden Fortress stuff, the dragon, super awesome, the magma giant. We've got a bunch of the new Kickstarter models from this last spring. We've got all the new allies that were recently released, the Rancher, the Preacher, the Wrangler. I've also got the Lost Army Standard Bearer, and I've got a little surprise for you guys. I recently was doing a 25-day countdown on the Shadows of Brimstone community group on Facebook, and everyone was super cool and super excited about all the miniatures and everything, and so I thought to myself, you know, it'd be really cool to do a video that kind of shows you start to finish what goes into painting a studio figure for Shadows of Brimstone. All right, let's do this. My name is Aaron Lovejoy, and I'm the studio painter for Flying Frog Production. For the past 5 years, I've done all the studio figs, pretty much everything you've seen on the boxes, box art, in the rule books, stuff like that. When I get a commission for doing the studio models for Flying Frog, usually they send me concept art. In this case, they had some concept art of the Blasted Waste scavengers. And they gave me a little bit of leeway to kind of do what I wanted on this. Make it similar but different. So I decided to do something, a similar scheme to what I'd done for my own game at home. This is the Wasteland War Master, and these figures are super cool. This is a resin model. Basically, when I start a project like this, I try to get the base colors on as quickly as possible. I do mostly wet blending. Paint's fairly thick. Don't thin my paint very much at all. And at some point, I do put in a few little details just to kind of get an idea of what things will look like. Like right now, I'm adding some rust and a couple little highlights to his little belt sash thing, whatever that is. But basically, I want to have like a clear picture of what the model will look like at the end. So you know, mid-tone shadows, maybe a little bit of highlighting, and a lot of wet blending. I find that with the wet blending, I can get better color variations than if I just use layering. By base coating the model this way, I get a pretty clear picture very quickly, you know, within an hour or two of what the finished model will look like. It doesn't have all the details or anything, but it's a general picture of what it will look like. I really love adding details to these models, and like adding the little chevrons there on the piston. Just kind of adds an extra touch of detail, and makes that arm a little bit more interesting. You also notice I added some more red to the elbow and the shoulder, and I actually took out the red belt buckle. So they wanted that silver, but they liked the red on the arm. So just adding a little bit more to kind of balance it out. It's always fun to add scratches. Always fun. Scratches and rust. Absolutely love it. The trick here is a brush with a really fine tip. So I'm using an Artist Opus brush, size 2. It's got a big belly on it, but it has a really fine tip, so it keeps a lot of moisture in the brush, but allows me to do really small brush strokes. I'm also actually using this scratching to highlight the model. Here's one of my favorite parts. I love doing the leather on these models. I've painted a lot of cowboys, a lot of cowboys in my time at Flying Frog, and if there's one thing that a cowboy has a lot of, it's leather. And so this guy has a bunch of leather straps, and it's always fun doing different kinds of leather, shiny leather, roughed up leather, and this guy's, you know, he's a wasteland scavenger. Basically, he's gonna have roughed up leather. It's not brand new, so doing lots of textures and stuff is a lot of fun. I find that leathers, to highlight them, generally I use very saturated colors. So in this case I'm using Mornfang brown and Baylor brown mixed together, and I'm trying to keep that color very orange and yellowish, so that it shows up, because the amount of paint I'm putting on the model is very little, so you want to have that saturated color shows up really well. You also notice on a display level model that I do a lot of dark lining. And in this case it's black mixed with dead purple from Nocturna, and it makes like a really rich blackish color, and I will dark line like crazy all throughout the process, because I want the miniature to have a really good focus, so you see all the parts really well. The key is to make sure those dark lines stay really thin. This really is the time where it takes a lot of time on the model. All the details, that's where all the time goes in on the model. So that's another reason why I like to get my base coats put together really quickly, and just move right on to the detailing, because it's definitely going to take the longest, and I want it to take the longest. I want to spend all my time on details. So to make the highlights on the head pop, I saturated my color, my green, with Baylor brown, and then just pure Cygnus yellow, like a very primary yellow color, so that I could get really vibrant colors, and they would show up in a small area. I also used a little bit of titanium white, but not very much. You also notice I use a real squiggly motion with my brush on the skin, because I want to have a very strange texture for his like lizardy kind of skin. constantly grabbing from different spots in my palette so that I can get different colors and do those textures in different colors. So it's very hard for your eye to tell where one color starts and one color ends. You can see the texture really good here. Just kind of squiggling my brush, wiggling it, and it makes strange shapes that I can never do if I try to do it on purpose. Also start detailing out around where those horns are coming out of his head. I couldn't really tell on the sculpt, but it looked like the horns are coming out of the skin, so I wanted to have like the little folds where the skin kind of wrinkles up around the horns. It's very subtle, but I thought it looked kind of cool. You notice I add a lot of detail on models. Sometimes it's not even there. Yeah, you'll notice that with a lot of painters, they just add information, constantly adding information. And that's what makes the paint jobs look really cool. You can see towards the end, the brush strokes get smaller and smaller, tighter and tighter, getting those details super, super crisp. You also might be surprised to notice that I don't thin my paints a whole lot, especially at the end. These paints are fairly thick, and I want the color to be, you know, as opaque as possible when I put it down. So that gives me a nice bright highlight. And it doesn't get chalky. If you thin your paints too much, they tend to get chalky. You also see me go over the same spots over and over and over again with the same exact color. This is called insisting on color. And I basically just keep painting that color down over and over again until it gets pretty much opaque. I want that color to be super strong, especially here in the skin. I want the color to be very strong. So I really hadn't planned on doing this video, but while I was doing the 25 days to GenCon countdown over on the Flying Frog fan page on Facebook, I just thought I need to give the fans something extra. Everyone was so cool, like commenting and posting their own work and stuff. I just thought it'd be really cool to give something back to them. So this is for all the fans over on the Flying Frog Facebook page. And all over the world, wherever you may be. I hope you're enjoying painting your models as much as I have. So you see I like doing a lot of textures, and on the little robe in front, I did sort of a cross-hatched texture, so it looks like threads going up and down. It's very threaded. But then on his pants, I'm doing more of splotches. So I've got 3 different kinds of textures going, and then of course the weird squiggly texture on the legs, which is basically on all the skin. Textures are a lot of fun because they add a nice contrast to, you know, the other areas of the model that might be smooth. So you got smooth transitions and then texture transitions. And then of course we have a lot of rust and scratches on this model. So there's just a lot of texture on this model altogether. So I wanted to desaturate the sand crab's head on the back of his, well, it's basically a shield, but it's the head of a beast from the Blasted Waste. And so I needed a sort of a more desaturated brown to go on top of what I'd already done. So I grabbed Caked Earth from Secret Weapon Miniatures, and it's kind of like a really dull dirt kind of color, but I thought it would work really well for the highlights on the shield. So for his goggles, I used a bluish gray, and I did that because I wanted to have like a cool black for the goggles, because his skin is so warm with all that yellow in it. So I wanted a little bit of a contrast up on his face. There's so many highlights though on the goggles that you may not be able to tell, but I always like throwing a bunch of contrast in. You notice his little skirt is a bluish color, and having that warm cold contrast across the body is really good. I also added blue goggles, or blue lenses in the goggles, and that cools it down a little bit too. It's basically, in the concept art, it just looked like they were clear lenses, but I figured that maybe the sky is reflecting off of them or something. So this is where it starts getting interesting. I'm getting towards the end of the paint job, and so I'm going to start putting some glazes in, and I'm using a really, really dark brown, black, purple. So I've mixed up a very dark color, and it's barely invisible when I spray it on. It's basically just a glaze, and so I'm slowly but surely building it up on areas that I want to be darker, coming from the bottom, all the way up to the top. Then of course, once I have that on, I need to reapply some of my highlights, not all of them, but a few. That gives me really dark shadows and nice pop-in highlights. Maybe add a little bit of dirt. You always gotta have dirt on your models, especially in the Blasted Waste. Those guys are real dirty. So I'm just using 2-brush blend, putting the paint down with one brush, and then wiping it away with the second brush. For the base on this guy, he was a Slada base guy, so I just glued him on the Slada right to a base, and so I thought, well, I might as well just use that as one giant pin. So I basically encased that Slada, the slot at the bottom of the model. I just encased it into the base itself. So I gave him a little rock to stand on and some sand in front of it. Totally Blasted Waste. Looks really good. The sand I sculpt with a sponge, and then the rock I just use another rock to give it a little bit of texture. And of course, we gotta have some junk. So I took this little, this is a little plastic piece from a railroad, some sort of railroad part. I found it at the local hobby store. I use these all the time for shadow stuff. Basically it's just junk on the ground, half buried. And once again, I just wet blend the whole thing. In fact, I think I did this so fast, the colors never really dried. I just kept putting colors on top of other colors. A really interesting thing, when you're wet blending, if you don't push very hard, you can actually lay one color right on top of another wet color, and it won't blend. So once you start pushing, then the blend happens. So if you're really precise with your brush, you can actually get away with quite a bit. It's a lot of fun. Also makes painting really fast because you're not sitting around waiting for stuff to dry. Then to start adding in some highlights, picking out some of the little textures that my rock stamp left, and then adding, of course, a bunch of rust into that can. Maybe it's a gas can or an oil can or something that's got left in the desert. Once again, just getting those details smaller and smaller and smaller. It really does pay to have a good brush. You notice I jump between a nylon brush and a really good Kolinsky sable brush all the time. The nylon brush basically is to save my Kolinsky sable for when I need to do details like this. Not to mention, actually, the nylon brush puts down paint more evenly, so for base coating and stuff, the nylon brushes are far superior than the Kolinsky sables. But at the end of a paint job like this, or for all the detail stuff, I'm definitely switching back to my Artist Opus brush. And just start coming back in with my textures, especially, and hitting some, adding some extra detail, just kind of livening it up a little bit, maybe getting a little bit better edge on some of the edges of the fabric, get a nice little highlight going there, but in a textury kind of fashion. I hope you enjoyed this kind of behind the scenes look at how I paint a studio fig for Shadows of Brimstone. As always, if you are looking to up your miniature painting game, stop on by www.patreon.com/miniaturemonthly or go to miniaturemonthly.com. We have lots of painting tutorials, weekend boot camps, private coachings, you name it. We'll get you leveled up and rocking and rolling with these Shadows of Brimstone miniatures.